Hello, everyone. We will get started in a minute. All right. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I hope everyone is having a great Thursday. My name is Laura, and I'm the Director of Media Relations with the Gluten Free Media Group, and I will be your moderator today. As always, we invite you to take part in today's conversation, so please ask questions and share comments using your GoToWebinar panel, and we will go through those questions at the end. I'm so excited to introduce our presenter today, John Pulzer. John is a 20-year veteran of the food industry. He started his career in a series of marketing and product development roles for Frito-Lay, then struck out on his own and began consulting for the food and beverage industry. In 2006, John started Healthy Goodness as a side project to help companies think about online as a sales channel. And 5 years ago, John ventured into the world of frozen food fulfillment and is with us today to share what he's learned about the complexity of shipping frozen foods. With that, I'm honored to welcome you, John, and I will turn the microphone over to you.
Thanks, Laura. I'm excited to be here today and to talk with all of you about frozen food shipping and frozen food e-commerce. It's really an interesting area for me. And, it's one that's been a challenge for a long, long time. But for a long time, I think in the traditional world of brick and mortar retail, it didn't really matter that much that it was a challenge because, it wasn't top of mind for most people. But today, with e-commerce here to stay, it's a challenge that we've really taken on as a company. And we're going to walk through the parts and pieces of really the fulfillment component of shipping frozen food, what we really believe to be the missing link, and share what we've learned, share our experiences with frozen food. It continues to shape our company, and we'll give you some examples of that along the way. And then we're going to leave some time at the end, of course, for some questions and answers. If you've got them, we'd be more than happy to dive into those as well. So throughout the world of consulting in frozen food, after leaving big corporate America, I had the benefit of working with a lot of small companies, a lot of large companies. I actually grew up in a family business. I worked for big corporations. So really have had a good mix of experience with respect to working with a wide variety of companies. And it really struck me as I was talking with people and networking through the industry, as I would talk with people in the frozen food industry about how wonderfully positioned their products were for all of the trends that are going on out there. And yet the conversations always stopped very quickly when we started to talk about who was going to ship the stuff. So that's really how all of this stuff began. And with that, let's get started. Those people that I've talked to along the way as we've gone through this process, all ask me really the same question. They say, why in the world would you focus on frozen foods with all the challenges that it presents? And really, it's a fair question. But there are some answers, I think. Some of those answers are as follows. Frozen foods themselves sit on a lot of trends, right? So obviously gluten-free and the world of specialized food is a really wonderful area, and it's helping so many people out there. It's really fun to be a part of that and help to enable access to those kinds of foods. We have several gluten-free foods that we work with right now, and they sell really well on our site, I think in part because, again, the access just isn't as prevalent throughout the country as a lot of other kinds of foods are. So fun to be involved in gluten-free as well as dairy-free and some other areas like that. But there are some other trends that I think are going for frozen foods as well. Things like convenience. None of us are seeming to have more time during the day as we go along. So the ability to have a food option that is quick and convenient, and there's so many wonderful frozen foods out there today. It's really awesome. Authenticity is another thing that frozen enables, I think, because you don't have to have all of the stuff in the product to keep it, shall we say, fresh or shelf stable or able to be eaten. It can be in many ways without all those things. So that's really a fun one. And so a lot of times it's really what we find is the convergence of convenience and health. And frozen food isn't going away anytime soon. That doesn't mean it doesn't have all these challenges that I keep alluding to, but at the same time, I think that there's clearly still keen interest in the numbers, which would bear that out as well. Frozen food, interestingly enough, is also behind the curve of e-commerce. So, problem, yeah, but also I think an opportunity. So, if we could solve some of these problems, what might we be able to do? That's another reason why we focus on frozen. A lot of conversations led to testing. At the end of the day, finally, I just said to a couple of folks I knew in the frozen food industry, what if we did the shipping? What would that look like? And that conversation led to another, which led to some testing on the West Coast where I'm located. And that's how we began and really evolved into a full-time frozen food fulfillment company. So that's a little bit of history. But a big part of this evolution isn't just about what we've done with frozen fulfillment. It's really the evolution of e-commerce as a whole. So let's spend just a minute talking about that. E-commerce is an immediate opportunity, and some of you out there may already be involved in e-commerce. Some of you may not be. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of different companies in different life stages, and there are a lot of things to get done in a day. And oftentimes with fewer people these days than there were 15, 20 years ago when companies had large staffs and people specialized in lots of different areas. The good news is that e-commerce is accessible to anybody right now. There are some wonderful e-commerce software tools that exist to get a website and a shopping cart up and running very quickly, and one that looks good and one that functions well and one that's reliable. Shopify, for example, is a very popular platform, and there are others. We've developed our own e-commerce site, and it plays a role, but it's certainly not the only component out there. There's no reason why any brand shouldn't think about multiple channels for their product, including their own website. But at the same time, the ability to create these kinds of things is better today than it's ever been. So that's great. E-commerce can also fill distribution gaps and create access to all of your products. So, the best of products out there, the best of brands out there traditionally do not have everything they make in every point of distribution in every part of the country. So where there are not full distribution points for your products, e-commerce can fill those gaps, and people that know your brand and are looking for your product are going to go online and look for it. The other thing that's interesting about this, I think, is that if you've got some really strong sellers that are in distribution pretty solidly everywhere, that's wonderful news, but not necessarily a reason not to be in e-commerce, because I think what you've got at that point is you've got a brand that people know, a brand that people like, if you've got that situation, and probably a group of consumers who would be very interested and willing to try additional products. They just don't have access to them if not every item is in distribution in your grocery store. So that's another one. I think, in terms of e-commerce, a very common question I get when we get started in some of these conversations with folks that haven't gotten into e-commerce yet is, what can I expect in terms of volume when we get started? And that too is a fair question, I think. But there's just so many variables involved: the brand, the competition, the length of time in business, the experience that you've had with customers. All those kinds of things are things that I certainly wouldn't know about. And I think until we get some experience and some data from selling online, we're just not going to know a lot. And that's a challenge sometimes to think through that kind of thing. But I can tell you this: the companies that seem to do the best online seem to have been at it the longest, which I think says something. They also seem to have a very methodical approach. So they just are very consistent about it. They commit to it, they get started, they learn, they make adjustments, they learn some more, they adjust, they learn some more. You get the point. It's interesting. I got a teenage son, and I hear some pretty funny expressions around the house once in a while. And one of them lately is, I'll offer some sort of sage wisdom, at least in my mind, to my son. And he'll roll his eyes and say, "Yeah, Dad, said no one ever." But I really think it's true. Nobody's going to say, "I wish we could have waited longer to get started with e-commerce." In fact, just yesterday, this popped into my inbox. It's another report of another study saying consumers will purchase more groceries online than ever before. And in fact, this particular article, and there are lots of them out there like this, but it's interesting to note that even though the food industry in general has been behind when it comes to e-commerce, this article predicts that 70% of customers will regularly purchase consumer packaged goods online in 5 to 7 years. And it goes on to say that within 4 years, predicts spending could hit $100 billion a year, right? So good news again, I think, in that the food and groceries are catching up in terms of e-commerce. So, I don't think anybody out there that doesn't want to have a piece of the online marketplace, but it needs to be part of the plan, right? It's not just going to happen. It's not just going to evolve without a very clear plan and a roadmap for what you're trying to accomplish. So, okay, good news. Online grocery purchases are increasing, but there's a problem, right? Frozen doesn't fit neatly into e-commerce. And while I may not be telling you anything you don't know already, the reason why I want to point these out is because these are the major things that need to be solved for and thought through with the solutions to make this a profitable endeavor for your company and for your brand. So let's talk a little bit about these kinds of things. It's obviously far more complex than shipping shelf-stable items. I mean, that's not a shocker to anybody. It requires more packaging and more planning. Okay. Requires quick delivery. Now, this is an interesting one because traditionally this, might have been looked at as a negative, right? Man, we've got to deliver this thing within 2 or 3 days to get it there frozen. It's really a challenge. It's more in shipping costs, and that's still true, of course. But I will also say this. The need for quick delivery, I don't think, is necessarily a bad thing. In fact, Amazon has trained us to expect 2-day delivery or faster. So if that's the bar that's been set, then I think there probably is a need in terms of delivering frozen shipments quickly anyway. So I wouldn't necessarily look at that one as a negative, but it is a must by any stretch. It results in higher shipping costs. And it also eliminates the weekends as a travel day. That's another thing that is part of that planning component. You can't ship over the weekends. Any of these things go wrong, and you've really got an expensive, problem to solve. Reshipping frozen is not anything anybody wants to do. Now, things happen. Sometimes a cooler might crack or break. Sometimes FedEx or UPS or whoever is delivering the package will have a delay. Sometimes weather comes into play. There are lots of weather events that happen through the course of a month or a year, right? And really in terms of thinking about all of these challenges, I remember talking to my wife when I made the decision to start testing frozen fulfillment and when we got started. And the conversation really started with, I might be completely crazy, but I think there's an opportunity here. So, with that said, let's dig in and talk about the kinds of things that we've done and we've thought about to really attack each of these challenges and figure out how to make it happen. I think at the end of the day, my perspective is if it were easy, anybody could do it. And that is the opportunity. It can be intimidating, but it's true for my business that the opportunity is figuring this stuff out. And it's true for your business too. Being well positioned as an online business will either be a competitive advantage for you and your brand, or it'll be a weakness. And with more dollars flowing to online purchases every year, we all want those trends working for us. So if the trends are there and the software tools are there, what's next? What's next really is figuring out the fulfillment piece. And again, that's what our company is dedicated to. Really, enabling e-commerce for frozen requires a robust fulfillment plan. Okay, there are some really important elements that need to be in place and need to be thought through regarding this, because if you were just to put a website up and a shopping cart up and start selling products, you're going to find out really fast if you don't have a plan for packaging and for dry ice or gel packs, if you don't have a plan for shipping. A lot of those things not only can cause delays in getting products to your customer, but it also can have major impacts on your profitability. There are really two main problems we saw when we started looking at this category, and those were as follows. One is shipping cost. When I began looking at frozen food online, and this is only a couple of years ago now, it seemed like everything that I was looking at required second-day air shipment. And that's a really heavy expense. So if I'm going to buy some ice cream for my son's birthday party once every 5 years, maybe I'd spend that. But it's certainly not going to be a recurring purchase every week or every month in my household. So that was one I felt like we really needed to be able to solve for if we were going to be able to make an impact here. And then the second thing I saw, which I thought was, uniquely a unique thing to frozen, was bulk purchases were required. In other words, you had to buy a full case of something. Now, in my estimation, if it's a product that I've already tried and I know that I love it and I just can't access it because my local grocery store is sold out of it or maybe doesn't carry it anymore, then I may not have any trouble buying, a full case of something. However, it certainly is a barrier to trial, and it certainly is a barrier to repeat purchases. So that's another issue that we wanted to solve, and we'll talk a bit about both of these things. Big picture elements are really going to set the stage for your strategy. But again, it's attention to detail. Thoughtful execution is the make or break here. just as with any solid strategy, if it's not executed well, it's not going to work for you. So as we begin to break this stuff down, let's dig in and talk. Approach to frozen fulfillment really involves some static components. One of them is a shipping strategy, right? Where are you going to ship from? Are you going to ship from one location or more than one location? What kinds of shipping are you going to offer? Is it ground shipping? Is it air shipping? Is it multiple types of shipping that you're going to offer your customers? And as important as anything else, what impact does that shipping cost have on the pricing for your products? Because if the shipping is going to cause your products to be priced beyond the consideration set for your online customers, none of this stuff matters, right? Shipping is going to be the biggest expense, and it's one that really needs to be paid attention to. So, we'll talk a bit more about how we bring this down, but it's really a major component and a static component of your plan. It's one that you've got to understand from the outset, and you've got to be managing it, looking at it along the way as well. Minimum order quantity. We just talked about buying in bulk. Now, this is kind of a conundrum because it's not profitable to ship one of anything frozen. You can't ship 1 pint of ice cream frozen and make any money doing it. There's just too much involved in the packaging cost. There's too much involved in all of the other costs combined in getting this thing out. So the question is, if you need to ship multiple things in a cooler, how do you do that in a way that doesn't require the customer to buy in bulk? Well, you just offer them variety. Even if it's within your own product line, you can offer them a mix and match where they can mix and match different flavors. You get trial different flavors, and that's really an interesting thing. Now, on our e-commerce website, we've built it custom from the ground up to be able to handle frozen food cross-category shopping. So really trying to mimic a customer walking down the frozen food aisle, but being able to pick from different brands, from different flavors, and mix and match different categories into their basket or into their cooler. Now that's we think an interesting strategy, but there are lots of folks that we work with who on their own brand site offer that same kind of mix and match opportunity for their customers, really giving the customers control. So there does need to be a minimum order amount.
Hey, John, it is Laura. I'm just, I think our slides are stuck here, so maybe let's try to refresh it really quickly.
Okay. Sorry about that. Obviously in front of me, they're clicking along just fine. Let me try that here. So Laura, I'm on a slide that says breaking it down. Is that what you're seeing?
I was seeing that, and now I'm not seeing that. Hold on one moment. Yeah, it's stuck on our little intro page for me. So let's try refreshing one more time. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. All right, it is up and running. For me, it was a second ago.
Is it again?
It seems to be off now again. It was up for 1 second.
Well, I'll tell you what, I will continue to refresh this as I talk, but I think in the interest of time and making sure that people get the information, should I continue at least with the, I guess, the audio of this?
Yeah, if you just try one more time, it was up a second ago and then it went away. But yeah, if you just keep refreshing, but if it's not working, we'll go ahead and the audio is plenty. So thank you.
Okay. And I can make this available if you want to send it out to people if they have an interest in seeing it. And so we'll
Great.
do that.
It looks like it's up now for me.
Oh, it is. Okay. I'm going to keep clicking along as I go through it just in case it clicks back in. But again, hopefully the audio will be enough to follow along at least. I know it's helpful to have a visual, but okay, so let's jump back in. Another one of the static components to this is packaging. Packaging, there's all kinds of different packaging out there for frozen foods. And if you've been looking around, you've probably seen a lot of it. Um, at the end of the day, the main thing with shipping frozen food is making sure it stays frozen, right? Now, if you've got a product that can slack out during shipment, that's an important component, and we can talk about packaging that can accommodate that. But at the end of the day, we really need to make sure it stays frozen, and from there, look at what the alternatives are. Now, there are some exciting things going on, I think, in packaging, and we'll talk a bit about those as well. There are also some variable components, and these kinds of things are going to change. Typically, they can change as frequently as shipment to shipment. Now, for us, they change shipment to shipment because we have so many different products that we ship. For you, the type of product that you ship might be the same every time. So if that's true, you can really, eliminate that as a variable that you've got to concern yourself with. But if you've got different brands that react differently within a shipment, that might be something to keep in mind. Time in transit is one of those things that I think is an important one to understand. And if you already understand it, my apologies, but let me just say really quickly that it's an important one to understand because you're going to be determining how long you need to keep something inside a cooler or a package frozen or cold, depending on your product, while it's on its way to its ultimate destination, right? And when FedEx or UPS, for example, say two-day ground shipment, let's use that as an example. Two-day ground shipment doesn't mean 48 hours. It seems like it should, but it doesn't necessarily, because if you're going to pick, pack, and ship a product on a Monday, day one of a two-day ground shipment does not kick in until the day after you ship it. So if you ship it on Monday, two-day ground means it's going to be delivered by end of day on Wednesday. Now that could very well be beyond 48 hours. Just I want to point it out because it's one of those things that needs to be a consideration in terms of understanding time in transit that impacts how you set up your shipping strategy, which is one of those bigger rock components up top, but it also impacts things like the amount of coolant you need to use in the cooler. Sometimes it impacts the type of cooler you need to use, those kinds of things. Weather is one of those things that we watch all the time. And during summer months, we've got to use more dry ice as an example in many shipments. During winter months, sometimes we use less, depends on where it's shipping from, depends on where it's shipping to. I mean, there are lots of variables involved here. And obviously the type of cooling agent as well is a component. So when we talk about shipping strategy, the first key really is to maximize ground shipping. Anytime you put anything on an airplane, your costs are going to go up multiples, and it's just going to be an inhibitor. Either your customers just aren't going to pay it, at least not regularly. Now, some may pay it from time to time, and if you've got a super premium brand, you might find that it's a great gift, it's a great holiday item, it's great around 4th of July. Maybe there could be some great times during the year where people will pay that kind of stuff, that kind of air shipping. But on a day-to-day basis, you really want to be able to maximize ground shipping wherever possible. You want to minimize package weight as well. And one of the things that's really important to understand here is that there are variables that go into your package weight that are important to understand. One of them is, what's the coolant you're going to use? Dry ice is heavy, right? And if you're using, a lot of dry ice, sometimes that can weigh multiples of the weight of your product in the package itself. The other thing that's important to understand is dimensional weight, which is something that the shipping companies put in place a couple of years ago as a way to pass along a price increase. But essentially what that does is that it takes into account the overall dimensions of your package. So if you've got products inside a cooler, for example, and that the dimensions of that overall package are large enough to hold your product, they're large enough to hold dry ice, there's cooler walls of 1.5 inches or so on each side, top and bottom, that package starts to grow in size, right? And that dimensional weight can have a significant impact on your shipping costs. So what you really want to do is you want to be able to minimize package weight whenever possible. That includes dimensional weight. You want to minimize transit time. So just as we were talking about, transit time can be 24 hours, could be 48 hours, could be 72 hours. We do a lot of testing when we work with new products and new types of products. And by all means, if you've done some shipping with your products, you're the experts on your products. We would love to hear what you're doing with your products. We're always interested in learning more about different kinds of product brands, different types of product categories. For example, I'll give you an example of this. Transit time is such that there are some products we ship that don't need any cooler or any dry ice as long as they're shipping 1 or 2 days. If they're shipping longer than that, then they need a cooler or dry ice. So just interesting that there are some different things out there. And then I think the other thing from a static component in your shipping strategy is you really want to automate whenever possible. If you're doing this yourself, you've probably been in a situation where you had to go in, log into FedEx.com or UPS.com and enter all of the parts and pieces of a shipping address. And that is just way too time consuming to be doing on an order by order basis. So you've got to be able to automate the process of processing your shipping when it comes time to do that. Another static component is minimum order quantity. So you do need a minimum order quantity to be profitable. We typically see the lowest for a premium brand being in the range of 4 items in a cooler. Most brands need to have 6 in a cooler. And when I say need to have 6, it's what we see on our end, at least, from the standpoint of trying to understand if we're going to allocate packaging costs and dry ice cost and shipping cost across a number of different products and still keep those products all in a price point that seems to be acceptable to a consumer, we need to have a minimum order quantity. But it's important to understand that that minimum order quantity does not need to be a case of one item, right? So you can allow consumers to mix and match. The software's out there to do it. You know, it's a really important component of what we do. We started from day number 1 being able to pull individual items, not just be able to pull cases to ship them, because we believe that variety is really important for the consumer. And it's really, you know, I think just a matter of time until we all change the paradigm of selling frozen only by the case. It's not how consumers buy. Now, that may be the case if somebody goes into a Costco and buys a case of something, but there are a lot of purchases being done and a lot of trial, I think, importantly, being done by just adding one of something to a shopping cart in a grocery store. And we want to be able to mimic that same experience. Another static component we talked a little bit about is packaging. The most important thing is keeping your product frozen. You could have the most beautiful or the cheapest package out there, and if the product gets there in a puddle, it's going to be a really expensive endeavor with a really unhappy customer, and it's going to be a headache for you. So that's the most important thing, and that's really where we always start. EPS foam coolers are out there, and they are inexpensive, and they perform beautifully. Those are the benefits of them. I think we all know the cons of EPS foam coolers too, and that is that they are not environmentally friendly. And I'll be the first to tell you that as soon as we can ship stuff in other things that keeps the product frozen and is economically viable from a price point, then we'll be doing it. We still use a lot of coolers, but I'm happy to report that we are also shipping some eco-friendly coolers on the West Coast. It's at least a starting point for us. We've identified a cooler that performs well. We took our hardest to keep frozen items, which included things like ice cream with alcohol in it, if believe it or not, because alcohol doesn't freeze. And we put those things in these eco-friendly coolers, shipped it, did some sort of stress testing with it. And so I'm very optimistic about the future of eco-friendly. That said, we're not quite there yet. I'm hopeful that maybe by the end of 2018, we'll have a national program. Right now, we've got a few cooler sizes that we're able to utilize in certain circumstances where it makes sense on the West Coast, but we are getting experience with it, and there are some exciting things happening in that industry. So I think from a packaging standpoint, you've got to really evaluate how does your product need to be delivered. Does it need to be frozen? Can it be slacked along the way? And again, it just completely depends upon your product. And then understand the costs associated with these different types of packaging. The pros, the cons, and the timing of all those things are really going to drive that part of the strategy. From a variable component, the type of product and related temperature tolerance, I think, you know, what's the ideal product storage for your product? Ideal storage temperature for your product is an interesting thing to think about, because that's the temperature we're starting with when we start to pack this stuff, right? How do you need your product to be delivered? As I mentioned, we've got baked items, and if you would think that baked items would all ship the same, it's just not true. Excuse me. What we find is that there are some baked items that can stay frozen in the freezer, and when we have an order for them, we pick the orders, we pack them into boxes, or we shrink wrap them, and we ship them out with no cooler, no dry ice, and as long as they're delivered in 1 or 2 days, and then put back in the freezer, refrigerator, or consumed by the customer, they're just fine. There are other baked items, and largely this is ingredient driven, but other baked items that need to be frozen all the way through the process. So how your product needs to be delivered is something that we need to understand before we can start to dial in some of these variable components with respect to choices along the way from a packaging perspective. Can it freeze? Can it thaw? We've actually got a few products that can't freeze. We've got some products that aren't meant to be frozen products, but they're okay if they freeze. So there's a really wide range of things, you know, and we could talk about some more examples of that if you'd like at the end. terms of time in transit, we defined it a minute ago. Ship on a Monday, a 2-day ground shipment is going to arrive on a Wednesday, a 3-day ground shipment is going to arrive on a Thursday. That becomes important because when you start to think about your shipping schedule, if you're shipping from one location, as an example, from the East Coast, then if you've got a 3-day shipment, you can't ship that on a Thursday because it's going to sit in a warehouse over the weekend, right? If you shipped on a Thursday, Friday would be day number 1, Saturday would be day number 2, Sunday would be day number 3. Now you're starting to roll into Monday, and nothing moves on a Sunday, so you lost a day in transit, even though you've got a day of melt time in there. So that day in time in transit is important. One of the things that we've done as a company is we've identified 2 locations, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And the reason we do that is because we've got more shipping days. We reduce the time in transit. We can actually reach 80% of the US population with 2-day ground shipping or faster from both of our locations. And that helps us keep things on the ground. That's not to say that there aren't occasions where we ship things via air shipping, but keeping things on the ground, as we talked about, is really important. And then, from a time and transit standpoint, you got to plan around the weekends and holidays. And holidays is an important one to understand here as well. If you're not thinking about, a lot of times we've had people before run promotions for 4th of July or for Super Bowl is a good example right now. People run promotions for Super Bowl. We've got to build in time there to make sure that the time in transit based on where you're shipping from and where your customers are going to be ordering from, allow the product to arrive in time for the holiday. There's nothing worse than running a Super Bowl promotion and the products arrive on Tuesday after the Super Bowl ends. So all of those things really come into focus here as we go through this process. Weather, we adjust shipments all the time to accommodate for weather. The biggest and easiest example is in the summertime when there are peak days, it gets above 120 in certain states, certain regions. We've got to account for that, and we can just put shipping rules in place for your brand or your products, and I suggest you think about that as well. Do you have a seasonal product? I think it's really ironic for a frozen product to be seasonal in the summer, but it makes sense. It just happens to be the hardest time to ship, right? So if you've got those kinds of things, you've got to think about, what additional costs you might have during your peak selling times. For example, adding more dry ice to coolers during the summer will be an added expense. You've got to think about those things from a big picture standpoint, whether it's going to impact that kind of thing. And I think if you plan for the financial impact of weather, you're going to be able to accommodate that. Weather also is one of those things that is frustrating from a carrier standpoint. So UPS, FedEx, any other carrier, if they can't deliver because there's a storm coming, then that's unfortunately a problem because they don't reimburse for any of that stuff. So if there's a storm coming on the way, if you've got a heavy region where you ship a lot of product to, and they're going to be, in the middle of a blizzard for the next 3 days, it might be wise just to send an email out to your customers who I'm sure will understand, saying, we're not going to ship for the next couple of days due to weather. We'll be back in touch with the tracking number when we do ship. It just makes life a whole lot easier rather than sometimes than trying to kick things through some big storms. Type of cooling agent, dry ice is an amazing thing. It keeps things very cold for quite a while. It gets down to 109 degrees Fahrenheit, and we use a lot of it. We use it obviously to ship ice cream and popsicles, things of that nature, but sometimes we can use it for lots of other things. We just need to use less of it, perhaps. Gel packs are a variable that can work for a lot of companies, a lot of products. Again, just depends upon your product. The benefits of gel packs over dry ice is that you can order some and they're there to use whenever you need them. If you order dry ice, it's going to dissipate, it's going to go away. So if you don't use it, you lose it, and you got to pay for it either way. Do you need either is a question as well. Some items, bone broth or soup that can be frozen act as their own gel pack in the cooler sometimes. So again, depends upon your product a little bit, but bringing it all together, I think really what you've got to think about is maximizing ground shipping. You've got to offer consumers control over order variety, right? You've got to leverage existing technology, and you've got to automate anytime you can. My IT partner is really great about this, and he says it in a way that I really appreciate. He says, anytime you see yourself doing something twice, tell me, and let's look to see if we can automate it, because the goal here is to scale all of this. And we need to make sure that the repetitive things can be handled by technology and automated. So something to keep in mind as you go forward. My thought process is be ready to go eco when the timing is right. And again, we're doing some testing. We're doing some shipping now, some eco coolers. It's not quite ready for prime time. They're still quite a bit more expensive than styrofoam. Everybody says they want it. Nobody seems to want to pay for it. So I get both sides of it, but I think there will be a time when it's time to transition to eco coolers, and that'll be exciting. I think that'll really help give frozen shipping overall a really big boost. Establish shipping rules based on your setup and strategies. Let your customers know what those shipping rules are. It's going to save you a ton of time because consumers know what to expect. They're not going to be calling you asking for your product for when the product would arrive if I ordered today, those kinds of things. The other thing that will happen is you want to send tracking numbers to your customers just as soon as you have them. And then we also talked about, from an e-commerce standpoint, get started, learn, adjust, and repeat. It's a really important thing to commit to this, I think, and to be in a position to really be in a learning position so that you can evolve. And when you look back a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you can really look at the progress that you made in e-commerce. Because again, it's not going away. It's a matter of whether or not you're going to be able to count it as a competitive advantage for your company and your brand. So just, real quick summary here to wrap up before we go to Q&A. I want to make plenty of time for that. All of these things really have informed how we've designed our company, Healthy Goodness. And I just want to spend a minute talking about this because it might help you think about how do you take some of these things in theory and put them into practice, right? We have 2 locations, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, and we can hit approximately 80% of the population with 2-day ground shipping or faster from those 2 locations. And we actually find that we ship more than 80% of our shipments with 2-day ground shipping or faster. So it seems to be a really good setup from that standpoint. From a ground shipping map standpoint, and I'll show you how you can do this for yourself if you're shipping from your own location or shipping from another location. These are valuable tools that are available online. This happens to be from FedEx. So if you look at this, this happens to be Healthy Goodness ground shipping map. And you'll see in the pink areas, both in California and in North Carolina, that's where we ship from. So those pink areas are all 1-day ground shipments. The light blue areas are all 2-day ground shipments. And the orange is all 3-day ground shipments. What you'll find is that the green is 4-day ground shipments. In Montana, I think that's a state park. I don't know if we've ever had a shipment go to that area. In the very tip of the bottom of Texas, appears to be 4-day shipments for some of this stuff. But what you see is that we can hit a lot of area and a lot of population density, importantly, from those 2 locations. If you want to see what this looks like for your own operation, just go onto Google and search FedEx ground map, and you're going to see this come up. All you do is you put your origin zip code in there, whatever zip code that you're shipping from, and then you hit the view map button. And you'll see a map example on the right-hand side here. This is probably, if I were to guess, this is probably a Chicago-based company. If you happen to be in Chicago, plug in your zip code and find out for sure. But that's probably what that looks like. And you'll see in this example, if this was a company shipping map, a ground shipping map, they wouldn't be able to ship to the West Coast, California, Washington, Oregon, with 3-day ground shipping or faster. Really, lots of restrictions means you probably got to put things on planes to get there. Those are some of the challenges that are faced there. We offer cross-category variety packs on healthygoodness.com. Again, this is just a way for us to provide additional options for the companies that we work with to have their products in additional locations. Now, some people use healthygoodness.com as their shopping cart, and they just link to it from their site, and that's great. But some folks also have their own shopping cart, which we think is great. We've got those integrations in place. We'll talk about that in a minute. We've got an add-on program to create trials. So once somebody's created an order on our site, during the checkout process, we will offer them the opportunity to add additional items at discounted prices to their coolers. And this seems to be a really popular process as well. We can do sampling in the same area as well. If a company says we're going to identify 100 units of this flavor of this product that we want to go out as a sample in your next 100 shipments, that's something we've done as well. Sampling frozen food's expensive, so we put that in there. That's been an interesting process. That seems to be a win for everybody involved as well. We do a lot of sales sample shipments. We do shipments to food service, to restaurants, to small independent retailers. We've got some large coolers, and anything that you can fit in a cooler with dry ice and FedEx or UPS will pick up, we can do. We've also, from a technology standpoint, done a lot behind the scenes. So we've done a lot that I'll talk about in a second, but from an integration standpoint, we've integrated with Shopify. So if you had a Shopify cart set up on your own website, those orders can come to us automatically. You don't have to do anything to send those orders to us. We can receive them, ship them, automatically send back a tracking number. Once that tracking number is back into Shopify, it can automatically be sent to your customer with an email with your brand logo on it. It's really a great system, and a great way to go if that's something you're interested in doing. And then recently we've had an integration with Amazon. We've got a lot of things that are in the works that are exciting, and we'll be talking about in the future. But those are some things that are going on right now and available today. Shipping some eco coolers on the West Coast. Again, that's an area that we're very excited about, and we're pushing for, because we believe in it fundamentally, but we also believe that consumer response is going to be really good to it. And we think that we're going to increase orders when people are able to buy eco coolers, because they'll just be able to put them in the recycling bin or the compost bin rather than having to try to figure out what to do with styrofoam. And then we've also done some custom development of automated order processing, order routing, shipping rules tracking. There are a lot of things that go on under the hood or behind the scenes once we receive an order to make sure that we're doing things as quickly, as accurately as possible to make sure that we get the orders processed and shipped in an efficient manner. So that's a lot of stuff. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you about frozen shipping, to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of my experience with it and some of the challenges we've seen, some of the solutions that we've identified. But as I said when we started the webinar today, I did want to make sure that we saved some time at the end for Q&A. So I'm hopeful that the slides click back in and you were able to follow along. But regardless, I think if you've got any questions, Laura, I think this might be a good time to jump in and do that kind of thing.
Yes, thank you so much, John. And for me, the slides were clicking through at the end, but I will send a follow-up email to everyone, and maybe we can attach your PowerPoint presentation just in case some people were having issues viewing that. So yeah, please submit questions if you have any, and we can spend some time and go through those. So submit those now if you have them, and we will see. Oh, we got some feedback that this person did see the slides correctly, so that's great. Thank you.
Great.
I will wait a couple of minutes just to see if any questions come in. Okay, we do have one here. Can you speak in more detail about some of the processes you've automated and tools to do that?
Yeah, sure. So automation is a great thing, but it's important to understand, how to put those rules in place. So some of the things that we've done, there was a time very early on when, a customer would receive an order on their website, and they'd have to find a way to get us all that order information. So, making those connections and those integrations with different websites was something that was really important. Those things are pretty straightforward. There are lots of ways to do those kinds of things. But as an example, we've automated with Shopify. We're automated with Amazon Seller Central so that we can receive that order information really, really quickly. There are some things that we do behind the scenes, and honestly, I know what we do, but the technology of it is not my realm. I'm very grateful for it. But things like when we receive an order, the order comes into our system, and we've automated many parts of our process that we used to do manually. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We ship from 2 locations, so we automatically look to see if the contents of an order has, if the inventory for that order is in both warehouses or not. We also look at the ship to state for that order and automatically route that order to the appropriate warehouse based on ship to state and based on inventory. We set up rules for the products that we can. So if we see, we automate this process for looking at what's inside of an order. We automate the amount of dry ice that's going to go in there and have rules surrounding that. So the time of year may change that. The time in transit may change that. The weather out there may change that, but all those things can be automated. And then I think, probably a really important thing is tracking, right? So from a tracking perspective, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you've got the ability to get your tracking number to customers as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the shipping companies don't make that easy because there is a blind spot or a delay from the time that a carrier picks up the package to the time they get it back to their sorting station and can scan it there. There will be no tracking information that shows up. So that's actually an interesting thing where we've made some decisions not to give out tracking numbers until we get verification from the carrier that they've got the package. But the automation of that is just a matter of putting things in place. Now, Shopify, as an example, once you put a tracking number into Shopify, into an order, and I'm sure that WooCommerce and all the other shopping carts that are out there are very similar. What happens is the tracking number automatically can, if you've got the settings set up correctly, trigger a pre-written email to your customer, right? And those are the kinds of automation things. If you're sitting up at night trying to send tracking numbers to your customers, it's going to drive you bonkers, and your customers are going to be calling you and emailing you. And that's probably a really good example of a simple automation that can help you a lot. We automatically take items out of inventory when we pick them in our warehouse. So from an inventory standpoint, we're able to automate, those kinds of things. I think anything that is done repetitively and done the same way, and rules can be applied to it, are things that are subject to automation. And those are a couple of examples that come to mind quickly. But if there are other things you'd like to know about specifically, please let me know.
All right, thank you. We do have a handful of other questions. So the next one is, what has been your experience of pros and cons of FedEx versus UPS?
It's a really good question. At the end of the day, they're very similar. One of the pros for UPS, I would say, is that and we do ship overnight packages. It's not like we ship 100% ground. And a lot of times, if you're shipping a sales sample, we ship a lot of those. As you know, buyers are not always the best in terms of giving notice. So a lot of those things have to go overnight. And the reason I bring that up is because if you're shipping a bunch of UPS orders, and some of them are overnight and some of them are ground, you're going to have one person coming to your location to pick up those packages. If you're shipping with FedEx, and I guess I don't still know exactly why this works this way, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but FedEx operates their ground business and their overnight business as completely separate companies. So if we've got FedEx ground orders and we've got FedEx overnight orders, those orders need to be separated on our docks after we've picked and packed them. And there will be two different trucks that show up, a FedEx ground truck and a FedEx express truck show up. So part of the reason that's important for you is if you've got, whether it's a lot or a few packages, you got to understand, if you're using FedEx, what kind of packages you've got, and if you've got to request two pickups, if you've got or you don't want to request a ground pickup if you've got an overnight package, I guess would be one thing to say, or vice versa. So that's probably the biggest thing from an operational standpoint, is just managing through that. Now, if you've got enough packages going out that you can have daily pickups, that's a good way to think about, I'm not sure if that's automation, but that's a way to systematize that process, but something to be aware of. They both offer discounts. Some of them offer discounts in different areas. They both have extended residential fees for areas that are outside of their regular routes, those kinds of things. It's important to compare rates. And what they would tell you is, ship all of your packages with us, and we'll give you better rates. As a company, what we do is we look at rates across both carriers, and that's another thing that we've automated. Being able to look at those rates as part of an automated process to make sure we're choosing the lowest rate available. In many cases, that comes back the same all the time. But if a rate increase does happen, or if there's something screwy about a delivery area, and one company can deliver it more efficiently to another, we're able to catch that. So hopefully that helps. But I would say, if you're just starting out with carriers, what I would say is find your local rep, get rate quotes from both of them, see where they land. And then, if one's more responsive than the other, that might go a long way, because other people are going to call when you have problems.
Great, thank you. We have several more. So the next one is, do you believe your integration allows shipping frozen to be profitable for a frozen manufacturer who is considering frozen shipping?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we can't do it in a way that makes sense financially, then it's not going to be a long-term business. So I think what I would say is, what we do with folks very early on in the process of having a discussion with them about whether or not we're going to work together is, we'll start to talk about some of these things, and we'll try to understand what the cost of their product is and what the retail price of their product is. Now, there's oftentimes going to be a premium for an online order of a frozen food product because of all the components involved. But again, that's not to say people don't buy it. It's just to say that there should be a premium expected. But what we can do is we can help think through that process with you. You tell us some information about your products, about your pricing. I can help you understand a bit more about the components, the packaging costs, the shipping costs, those kinds of things. And we can try to zero in on what we would expect a retail price to look like online based on a wide variety of factors, but we can certainly put that into some pricing formulas that we've got built here. And that might be a good place to start. And if those numbers work for you, great. If they don't, then it's really time to start thinking about, well, how might we adjust this? And I'll give you one quick example. If you've got a product that is small and low in retail price, and maybe a good example of that might be a protein bar, right? Then what you might find is that selling these things in bundles or in increments of more than 6 or 8 or 12 is something that's going to take you to high profitability, but it's also the type of product that people buy that way, right? It's not uncommon for somebody to buy a 12 pack or an 18 pack or a 24 pack of protein bars. So, there are some examples of those kinds of things where we maybe start with a standard look at pricing and costs, and then we make some adjustments based on what do we need to do, or what levers do we have to work with to maybe get your product into a position where the pricing is a bit more palatable for the consumer.
Okay, next question. Is there a limit of dry ice you can ship?
Depends on if it's ground or air. If you're shipping on the ground, generally the number to keep in mind is 70 pounds for the weight of the total package. I don't think you're ever going to need to use more than 20 pounds of dry ice in a package. Now, that might change if you're using a package that doesn't hold the cold very well. In other words, if there are seams in the packaging and air can get in and air can circulate, obviously air is the enemy of dry ice. It makes it dissipate faster. But if you've got a really tight container and you're shipping 3-day ground or less, in the heat of the summer, you might go up to 20 pounds if you've got an ice cream product, and that shouldn't be an issue at all. But once you get over 70 pounds with the carriers, regardless of what components that is dry ice and product and packaging, that's considered an overweight package. And there are going to be some additional fees tacked on for that.
All right, we have questions rolling in. Okay, next one is thank you for sharing today. How can I get our products featured / carried on Healthy Goodness?
Is the Q&A slide up, Laura?
It is.
So just email me and let's talk. We'd love to share some more information.
All right, next one. Can you offer suggestions for sources of cost-effective packaging, such as coolers and dry ice or gel packs?
Yeah, it's really frustrating. I got to tell you, the packaging world drives me nuts. And one of the things that we've been able to do, because we're shipping for so many different companies, and it's what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, is we've been able to establish some relationships with some packaging suppliers. Now, it's interesting because we've got 2 different locations on the coast, and we can't buy the same coolers from the same sources in both locations because they're essentially made regionally. And it would be crazy to ship coolers across the country because you're shipping air. So based on where you are, there's likely to be a regional supplier of coolers. Depending on the quantities that you're going through, you may be able to get some discounts on them. Definitely worth checking into. I'd be happy to share some information with you. Dry ice is another one of those things that's really elusive. The dry ice supply, the dry ice, raw material sourcing is one of those weird industries out there that seems to kind of go up and down and all over the place. But again, in any specific area or region, there's likely to be at least one dry ice supplier. Hopefully there's more than one because it gives you a little bit of leverage. But there's likely to be at least one dry ice supplier. A good way, one of the ways we found this when we first started testing, we literally went to grocery stores and bought dry ice from a grocery store that had a little cooler in the front of the store. And we looked at the packaging and just kind of did some basic homework to try to backtrack and figure out where that was coming from, and also started networking with some people in the area, some other people that we knew that were shipping with dry ice, to find some of those sources. But if I can be of help with any of those things, I'd be happy to, but it really depends a lot on where you are. So again, if you want to email me some questions, I'm happy to try to help.
Okay, next one. Do you vet the products you sell on your website? If so, what is the criteria?
Yeah, that's a good question. the answer is yes, we do vet them. But the criteria really is just to make sure that we understand that this is not, being made in a place that is going to put the product at risk or put anybody else at risk. We want to make sure it's a company that's got a product being manufactured in the right way, in the right place. There are some products on healthygoodness.com that you might look at them and say, that doesn't seem like a healthy product. Something about it is either sustainably sourced or locally sourced, or something that, maybe we think about it a little differently than some people would. But, we will be happy to talk to anybody about their products. There are lots of great frozen products out there, and lots of demand for lots of frozen products out there. So what I would say is, what we want to have on our site is things that people are looking for, things that are available to people. What's fun about frozen food is there are some wonderful brands, some fun things, some really great flavors, some really great things that people are doing from a development and kind of a new idea standpoint. If you got questions, call me. I can't think of an example of a product that we've turned away. There are some that we work with and do fulfillment for that we do not list on healthygoodness.com, just because they're a little bit outside of what we would consider to be in a quote unquote healthy world. And again, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. There's still a demand for those products, and we're happy to help ship sales samples for companies in those areas. But it's a very small percentage of what we do today. It's not to say we wouldn't do it if the numbers made sense and the relationship made sense.
All right, next one. Do you find that it is more economical to ship with dry ice rather than gel packs?
The answer is it depends, and I really don't mean to be coy about that. If you want to talk about a specific kind of product, if you've got a product that can be shipped with gel packs, life is going to be easier for you if you use the gel packs, because essentially you're not going to have any waste, right? It's hard to buy dry ice in small quantities, and even if you're buying it in larger quantities, if you don't use it all, it just evaporates and that money is completely gone. So if you can use gel packs and that works for your product, I'd suggest starting there. Now, dry ice can be economical if you've got your sourcing down, if you've got a good price from your dry ice supplier, if you know how much dry ice you're going to be using, so you've got a good utilization rate of it. It can be a more efficient way to go. And quite frankly, you can use less of it and keep stuff colder longer. So there are a couple of components there. Dry ice is generally going to be heavier than gel packs, although again, it depends on how many of them you're using and what form of gel pack or dry ice you're using. So again, even within that simple question, there are a lot of variables involved. And we've worked with a lot of different kinds of products to determine what the best solution, dry ice or gel packs, is for those products. And we'd be happy to do that with whomever asks the question.
Okay, next question is, what are the best automation platforms to integrate with? Seeing a lot of ads for ShipStation. Any opinion about their services?
It's a good question. I would explore them all. I would get information and capabilities directly from those companies. I know that there are companies we work with that use ShipStation. And I think any software that comes off the shelf is going to have lots of benefits. But it's going to be built for the most common uses, right? If you've got something that's a little quirky about the way you ship or the way that you want to work with something, then you might have some challenges with it. But a lot of these software platforms also have free trials, and they should have people that work with you while you're getting them up and running. So ShipStation, I know, is a very popular one. I know it's used by a lot of people. I don't have anything bad to say about it. I don't have any direct experience with it because we don't use it personally. But again, there's some great software out there, and shipping software, just like the e-commerce software, has come a long, long way. And I guess the other thing that I would just say is that if you're looking at shipping software, just like e-commerce software, make sure that you're looking at I'm sure they all have different tiers of subscriptions, right? So make sure you're getting the tier that you need. If you don't need the top tier that's going to give you 50,000 shipments a day, don't pay for it. Start with what you need and get started that way. Make sure you've got the elements in there that is going to allow you to do what you need to do. But that would be my suggestion. Our ShipStation, again, is as an example, is something that I don't have anything bad to say about. I've heard anything particularly negative, but we don't use it, so I can't give you my personal experience with it.
All right, John, this person says, we have had poor results with dry ice every single time, whether it led to eating away at our clamshell type packaging or it made the food taste bad. What are the optimal ways to use dry ice?
Yeah, so we've run into some challenges with dry ice affecting packaging as well. Um, and that's a challenge. So the one question is the product inside that clamshell packaging, is that a product that can be shipped without dry ice with gel packs, or in a different way? Another question, I guess, would be, is there a way to create a barrier inside the cooler between the dry ice and the clamshell? The further away you can keep that clamshell from the dry ice, the better off you're going to be. Now, there are obviously limits in terms of what makes sense doing that kind of thing. There are some perhaps other creative solutions that we could talk about, but I think at the end of the day, dry ice itself for us has worked really well. There have been some occasions where dry ice has caused some challenges. Now, I will also tell you that when shipping dry ice overnight, and by that I mean on an airplane, the process of elevation uh, and shipping in an airplane is very different. The pressure inside that package is different than if it's shipped via ground. So the combination of the cold and the pressure can have a different effect than if it's a ground shipment. So another component you might want to think about. If it's a product that absolutely needs to be shipped with dry ice and it's in a packaging form that cracks with dry ice, then clearly that's a problem that needs to be solved. So whether it's looking at a different packaging solution, maybe shrink wrapping that package to hold it together so it maybe doesn't crack, maybe finding a barrier within the cooler to keep the dry ice as far away as possible, maybe trying to use less dry ice to keep it cold, but maybe that the severity of the cold doesn't last quite as long during the shipment. All variables, but again, ultimately it's going to depend upon how the product reacts to those changes. We would just test a lot, I think, and try to find a solution that worked well and was satisfactory to the manufacturer of the product, and then we try to systematize that.
All right, we have a handful of other questions. The next one is, whenever I drop a cooler at FedEx, they ask if it has dry ice. Are there limitations on using dry ice?
Yeah, dropping off coolers at FedEx locations is a challenge. If you can drop it off at a sorting center, you're going to be in a better situation if you drop it off at a local Kinko's or FedEx store. They're just not used to handling dry ice that much. And if there are air shipments, it does have to have an additional label on it with a dry ice designation. And that's probably one of the reasons why they ask. If it is an overnight shipment, there is likely going to be an additional surcharge to the shipping cost. And that's probably another reason they ask. It is considered a hazardous material, so it needs to be handled correctly. And so coolers need to be able to breathe. Anything with shipping with it needs to be able to breathe. We, as an example, are on approved lists with FedEx and UPS to be able to ship with dry ice, and that seems to have solved all those problems for us. But it is going to be an ongoing challenge unless you get certified with FedEx, and you can talk to your FedEx rep about getting, on an approved list to ship dry ice to try to eliminate some of those problems if you have them consistently. But unfortunately, it's just one of those things. Unfortunately, the shipping companies don't make it easy to ship.
All right, do you recommend pellet dry ice or broken blocks?
We use 5-pound slices and 10-pound slices. And I guess the main reason we do that is because the product before it's used and in use lasts longer. So there's less surface area on it. Obviously, pellets are going to dissipate faster. That's not to say that pellets don't work. There are some occasions where we've got shortages of dry ice and pellets are the only thing that's available. And we've used them and they've worked beautifully. But, I think the other thing to consider is a 5-pound slab of dry ice is going to measure 10 inches by 5 inches by 2 inches. And you've got to make sure that there's room inside your cooler or your package for that amount of ice. The pellets allow you to put the pellets in a much more, I guess, smaller packages maybe is a better way to say it. It's a little bit harder to measure the weight of dry ice. So unless you're going to be measuring, and weighing the number of pellets that you're putting into a cooler rather than just filling it up, it's hard to know if you've got 5 pounds or 10 pounds. A good rule of thumb for dry ice, by the way, is 5 pounds per day in transit. So if it's a 2-day transit, 10 pounds. If it's 1 day, 5 pounds. A little bit more difficult with pellets to measure that out. It can be done, of course, but in terms of just being efficient with it, we've found that working with the slices is a more efficient way to go.
Are customers generally okay with bakery items being shipped fresh that are packaged for frozen storage when received?
We have customers, and when I say customers, brands that we work with that don't have any issues with that at all, and I think they do a really good job of communicating that their products are going to be sent this way. They have freeze upon arrival stickers on their packages. They've got communication or inserts within their packaging that communicate to customers as well. When they send the shipping notification, there's again information there about your package is going to arrive. It may have thawed during transit. The product is going to be perfectly okay, but we recommend freezing or refrigerating it or consuming it upon arrival, those kinds of things. So I think that communication can go a long way. You know, unfortunately, there are some other brands that, even though they do a lot of those same things, have a lot of consumer complaints. And I only laugh because it's kind of crazy. I wish there was a way to predict that kind of thing. But I think overall, the efficiencies of it are worth trying to make that work. And I think, you know, if you've got a long history with customers of sending things with dry ice and then you suddenly stop sending them with dry ice, you might have lots of questions from them. But if you're just getting started and you can do that and your product's going to hold up to it, I think that might be a great way to get started and at least try it to see if your customers are going to be accepting of delivery that way.
All right, I think this is the last question. It says, we've shipped with dry ice and tend to ship based on the weight of the items we need to keep frozen. You mentioned 5 pounds of dry ice per day in transit is a good rule of thumb. Is that the case regardless of the weight of what is being shipped?
It's a thanks for whoever asked that question. Thank you for asking that question. It's a very good one, and I probably should have said more about it. That's a good general starting point. Um, if we've got far more items in a cooler versus far fewer, we may look at adding more dry ice as well. So I think it's important to note that you know your product well, and if you're shipping it with dry ice based on weight and that's working for you, I wouldn't change it. If you think that you might be able to ship with less dry ice, or if you want to have an offline conversation about it, I'd be more than happy to offer some more specific information if I could get some more details on it. But it's something that you might want to test, because if you can ship with less dry ice, the dry ice is one of those things where not only do you save the cost of the dry ice if you can use less of it, but the weight of your package is going to be less, which means your shipping costs are less. It really has a ripple effect all the way through the process. Obviously, you want to make sure your product stays frozen. But if you can figure out what that range is and really dial it in, it's going to benefit you overall in your cost structure.
All right, well, I think that's wrapping up the question portion. I just want to thank you, John, for your webinar presentation. It was very informative. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. Look out for a follow-up email that has a recording of today's webinar, and I'll also send a supplemental email with your PowerPoint slides in case people missed those as well. So thank you very much, and feel free to reach out to me or John if you have any additional questions. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you, Laura.